Yeah, our last concert that we played was for you,
Yeah,
March 1st. That was the last time. And actually, not just the last concert. That's the last time I've been with the other three guys.
gosh,
We've been on, of course, on Zoom and everything
sure.
on the internet, but not in person. We're going to actually next week is our first rehearsal. We're going
Wow.
to meet and we're going to do a couple of films coming up, filmings.
Mm-hmm.
Some repertoire for 92nd Street Y, and then we're doing one for in where Larry used to live, and then we'll be doing something for I guess CMS later,
Mm-hmm.
and Menlo. But it's not for a live audience. So.
And it's totally. I mean, it's great to film and record to keep the music going, but it's just not the same.
No, no. I did just go to Taiwan, which was amazing.
Oh wow.
Not with the quartet, just myself with a few other faculty, and worked with a lot of Taiwanese students. And it was very safe there because they shut everything down really early. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, everybody in the audience was wearing masks, but it was for a live audience, and that was really thrilling just to
Oh, good.
just walking out on stage, the warmth that we felt from the audience was very moving. So we look forward to that again. And I think what I can say to all our friends there in Louisville is that my experience in Taiwan recently made me even more convinced that people are really hungry for the live concert and being able to share that in a safe safe environment
Mm.
and know that not be thinking about whether they're going to get sick from hearing this concert. But I know people ask me, do you think that classical music will survive this? And I think it will. And actually, in some ways, I think chamber music, I won't say that it has an advantage over bigger ensembles, but at least it's easier to bring a smaller group into a smaller hall and keep people distanced, and so that it may in a way come back before some of the bigger
Mm-hmm.
things like orchestra and opera and all. But at any rate, there's no question that people are really looking forward to that day, and I think it'll be the same for your audience there. And I mean, I can't believe we got stopped right in the middle of the Beethoven cycle during the
I know.
Beethoven year.
Um, I was just telling Adrian though at the same time how lucky were we that if we were going to split it, that it became that way.
Right.
Like, I mean,
Yeah.
we were able to at least finish that first half right before. And honestly, for everybody I know, that was the last live performance anyone had attended.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
at
I know.
least a really good, memorable one. So
Yeah, at least we were able to get the first half of it in. That's true, and it very memorable for us, and just because it was memorable anyway, but especially because it was the last one. It's still I still feel like we just played that yesterday, and it's how many months ago.
I know. Yeah.
It's crazy. And then the craziness with my leaving my violin in Adrian's car when I got to the airport.
Oh my gosh. I I'm just so grateful that we were able to give you a ride and you weren't with Uber.
Yeah,
'Cause
well,
otherwise it would have become one of those crazy Yo-Yo Ma leaving his cello in the taxi,
right.
stories.
Right, I know. Well, I've never done that before. I've never done it in a taxi or anything like that, but I did leave it in Adrian's car. It was because I got out and we were so involved with saying goodbye and everything that we completely. Then he drove off and went, "Hey, where's my violin?" Oh my God.
Well,
Anyway,
at least
that's
it
pretty
got
funny.
back safely to
Yes,
you.
it did. It did indeed. Well, that when we do get back there, we can look forward to the last half of the
Mm-hmm.
cycle, and yeah, I was just thinking about the next three concerts for the cycle. The fourth concert is one of my actual absolute favorites of the cycle when you do it chronologically, like we're
Mm-hmm.
doing now from this point to the end is chronological, in not completely the numbers, because they were published slightly out of order. I don't know why, But going from the harp, which is Opus 74, to Opus 95, it's actually only a year that separates those. And then there's a big jump to 127, to the late period, which are the last pieces that he wrote. So we jump from, I think it's 1810, 11 to 1824 for 127, and then the last few years he writes all the late quartets. So that's a very important. That intermission in the fourth one is very very important historically, and then from there we go into Opus 132 is actually next, and then 130 with the Grosse Fuge, which is the original way that he did it. So that fifth concert is huge, and then at the end with 131, and then the very last piece that he completes is 135, and then he writes an alternate finale for 130 and publishes the Grosse Fuge separately. But we're doing it chronologically. So actually the very, very last piece that he wrote was that alternate finale. So we end the whole cycle with that. And in a way, it's interesting because the 135 and that alternate finale are somehow he's come to terms with things, and they're quite resolved and happy in comedies, I would say, as opposed to 131, which is anything but a comedy,
right?
Or the Grosse Fuge or 132. So it's interesting in a way that he I think it was Goethe that said, a person can only find heaven if they first go through hell. And that's really, that last concert with 131 is as much a journey through the gaping jaws of hell as can be, and then somehow surviving that, and then there's an intermission, and then it becomes sort of almost like Verdi did the same thing with Othello, and Shakespeare also with the very last plays have a sense of comedy and resolve to them. So it's interesting that Beethoven does that as well, with not just with the string quartets, but with his whole output.
It's a really very special type of transcendence. Yeah,
and leaves a lot to be discussed and thought about afterwards. I mean, the last movement of 135 poses the question, must it be, muss es sein? And then that in the introduction, and then the finale is he turns it upside down, so it must be, es muss sein. Yeah. I mean, and some people think that it's to be taken seriously, and I'm sorry, I just don't think that everything Beethoven did leads up to a question of must it be? Yeah, it must be. I just don't think he was being completely serious about that. So that's fun to talk about. But I think it's interesting to hear them chronologically this way, because most people would not end the whole cycle with 135 and the alternate finale. They would end it with 131 or the Grosse Fuge. But that's not the way he wrote it. That's not the way he lived. His life went. So I think it's, if you're doing this as kind of an autobiography, by doing it close to chronological, we don't do the first three programs completely chronologically, but we do end with the Opus 18s and 59s finished, and then we go chronologically to the end. If you're going to do it that way, then I think you have to tell the story the way it happened.
Exactly. It's honest.
Yeah. Well, I hope everyone there knows how sorry we are that we couldn't finish it when we were supposed to this year. But I know everybody understands, and everybody would rather wait and be safe, and just know that we'll do everything we can to make it happen, and I know you will, and I know the audience will come and hear it. It'll be even more moving and special, I think, for us to finish this together after going through this horrible time.
I think so too. It all gives us something to hang on to and look forward to during this time. And I feel like for many of us, or most of us, like this, your last Beethoven performance was our last normal performance. So I feel like when we do come together, it's going to feel like hopefully this is the end of everything and be normal. So I think in a way it makes the whole experience a lot more special. Like if of course it wasn't planned, but this kind of mends things, I think.
Yeah. I think it'll mean even more. It has to, just to go through especially those late quartets, which deal with coming to the end of one's life and what we've all worried about and dealt with, and then to come through that. I mean, Opus 132, this is about thanking God for renewed health. I mean, what better piece to play at the end of this pandemic, hopefully at the end, or at least when we got it under control enough to be safe.
Enough to see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, I hope so.
Do you, just out of curiosity, do you have any particular, favorite books or recordings about Beethoven that you like to recommend to people, or you watch yourself or enjoy?
Well, I think the more you read about Beethoven's life, the more you'll appreciate. And it's not that you need to necessarily study every chord and know every analytical aspect of the pieces. Of course, the more you know about anything, the more you're going to appreciate it. But I think any of there's a Maynard Solomon famous biography of Beethoven that I would read. I would just read a general biography of Beethoven, and maybe just look at the last period, especially in the late quartets, and what was going on, not just what was going on in his life, but what was going on in terms of the history, in terms of what was happening in the world. And there's a book I would recommend. It's not about the quartet specifically, but I think it's called The Ninth. It's by Harvey Sachs, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And look it up, but I believe so. And it's about the Ninth Symphony, and it's really a long essay about the symphony, but also about what was going on historically and what led to him writing a piece with the words that are in the last movement, and just sort of embracing humanity, and the way why Beethoven did that. There are political and sociological reasons for him doing that, as well as his own emotional journey. With the quartets, I think it's much more personal. At that point, he's completely cut off from the world, after the Ninth Symphony, and I think that's part of why he goes back into a more intimate form, and you really are not so much dealing with the world then, but maybe with a place that Beethoven has gone that's kind of in between here and there, wherever there is. But,
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, these days you can you Google late quartets of Beethoven, and you'll find all kinds of things written about it. And I think anything that you look at is going to be interesting. But I think knowing more about also the historical context, what happened across the turn of the century, and then into the so-called Romantic era. And of course, Beethoven is given credit for that, and rightfully so, bringing music into that era. But why did that happen exactly, and how? And with the Napoleonic Wars going on at the beginning of the century, and the whole question of freedom and equality, and all these aspects that Beethoven was very involved with himself. And you find that, of course, in the late quartets. You find everything in the late quartets, but it's a little more obvious in the Ninth Symphony.
Mm-hmm.
And also interesting that he generally did not have what I would call a comfortable relationship with God.
Mm-hmm.
And toward the end of his life, he writes two especially major pieces that are religious of nature, the Missa Solemnis and Opus 132, the quartet. And I think that would be interesting to know the Missa Solemnis in order to better know Opus 132. That would be something else that I would recommend. But I would read that book, The Ninth, because I think there's some parts of it about the quartets in there too. He's talking about the late period, but also just having an idea what was going on in Beethoven's life and his own personal life at that point. The Opus 127 is written right after, or almost at the same time. I think he's doing sketches for the Ninth Symphony, and in fact the last movement of 127, that melody was originally sketched as a possible melody for the last movement of the Ninth, and then he decides to go to write this big, choral movement, and goes a different direction and uses the melody for 127. There's also a recitative in 132, between the march and the finale of 132, soon after the end of the beautiful thanks be to God for renewed health of the slow movement. And that recitative also it's interesting because of the big recitative in the Ninth Symphony. So I think it's good to know the Ninth Symphony, but also the Missa Solemnis, which kind of is a little bit always in the shadow of the Ninth Symphony. I think it's Opus 123. It's very close to the Ninth. Is I think 125, and then the quartet is 127. So that's all going on around that same time. And then there's a couple of years before he gets to, there's one year before he does the next two quartets, and then still another year before 131 and 135. So, I personally, I find that kind of thing at least as interesting to just get a sense of the context, whether it be historical, political, sociological, what's going on in writing at that time, what's going on in poetry and art, rather than just knowing what Beethoven did, on that particular Tuesday, which is interesting also. But
I think probably something our audience would be interested in, just how the four of you work together. Are these the kind of things you possibly discuss in rehearsals, besides figuring out intonation and balance and that type of thing? Or do you feel like it's all understood that you all are doing your own collective kind of historical context research?
I think we do that separately for the most part, although sometimes things come up that way if one of us feels that we're losing the big picture somehow from getting into too many details. Because I know that when we were recording, that was something that we were constantly coming back to, is because when you're recording, you're trying to make everything perfect, and these pieces are really hard to play, even just technically. And I think when we recorded the Beethovens, it was with Max Wilcox as our recording producer, and he had recorded most of the recordings with the Guarneri Quartet, and had done the Beethoven cycle with the Guarneri Quartet, which is one of the reasons we wanted him to do our recordings. And later after Max, he's gone now, but we couldn't keep recording with him. We went to a young producer named Da Hong Situ, who's a wonderful violinist as well as producer. But there was something. Max came along at the right time for us, because he was not a string player himself, although he'd had a lot of experience recording string players. But he also had a sense of being a pianist and being a conductor. He had a sense of really keeping the focus on the music and not losing that in the course of trying to play everything really perfectly together and in tune and all. They said, don't worry about that. We can fix that later. Let's make sure we don't lose the soul of the piece. And I remember, I'll tell you one story about recording, which I think is maybe interesting. And if it's not, you can just cut this part out.
I'm sure it is.
No, I was just thinking about when we recorded the cavatina, which is the beautiful slow movement from the Opus 130, and was Beethoven's favorite piece of music that he wrote when he was asked what his favorite piece of music was. So I remember that we were very worried about this recording of this particular piece, because it's kind of like the bar has been set very high, for recordings before us, including the gorgeous Guarneri Quartet recording of that. And so we were very nervous about this particular movement. And we went in, we played, as we normally do, we play a performance of that movement and go back and listen to it. And of course we weren't happy with it. No surprise there. And this and that and this, talking about it for a good 15, 20 minutes about what we did or didn't like, mostly didn't like about that. Mm-hmm. Went back in and did a second take. And when we finished it, it felt better. And we said to Max, because he's in the back room there listening, said, how was that, Max? And he said, much, much better. And he said, why don't you do another, just do another take instead of coming back and listening. You said, you're warmed up now, and just do another take. So we did take 3, which also felt good. We went back and listened to take 3, and it was definitely better than take 1. We did not listen to take 2. And he said, look, why don't you just go out? You've been talking about something. Why don't you just go out and do one more take? And then let me just see if there's anything little things that I need. And let's just leave it. And so we did one more take, and he said, I'd love to have this measure, and I'd love to have a better last chord, just that didn't quite fade out together. So we did those 2 spots and left it. And didn't listen to anything until he sent us the first edit. Listened to it, and we were all surprisingly happy with it. And I remember one of us, we listened with him to the first edit, went to his apartment, listened to it, and he said, I remember, I think I asked him, somebody did, I'm pretty sure it was me, said, I'm just curious how you put this together. And he said, well, remember that one take that you didn't listen to? He said, it's almost entirely the second take. And then we got really curious about it, because, so we listened to all 4 takes just out of curiosity. And what was interesting about it was, okay, take 1. Okay, so this is where we wanted to be, right? Yeah. I mean, ideally. Mm-hmm. And take 1 was over here somewhere. Okay. And it was okay, but it wasn't even a good performance, let alone like the recording we wanted to make. And then the second take kind of crosses this line here. I mean, everything that we talked about, taking a little more time here, a little more vibrato in this note, or a little more depth to the sound here, or more accent or less accent, whatever, I don't remember. Somehow miraculously happened on that second take. And then we do the third take, which starts out equally good or maybe even better, but then all those little things that we added from the first to the second take are all just a little bit more and a little bit too much. And then the fourth take goes even further. So it's like this thing that just kind of goes across this line, and then it goes like this, 3 and 4. So we learned so much from that one experience. First of all, you should listen to every take.
Sure.
Or sometimes do takes, because you learn from listening to them and changing things. Of course, that's part of the process. Probably learn more from recording than anything that we've ever done. But at the same time, sometimes the one that you just think of as something transitional is actually the one. And the more experience you have recording and playing and performing, the more sure of that. When we recorded the Schubert Quintet, and mentioned that in the beginning with Rostropovich, there was one take that we were doing in the slow movement, and I was trying so hard. I was so nervous. I was playing first violin, and I was really nervous about, again, recording this great piece with probably the greatest cellist who ever lived, and we had one night to record that slow movement. It was beautiful. It was snowing out, and you could see the snow coming down in the street light outside the church. It was the perfect setting, but we only had couple of hours to, to really make that really what we wanted. And I remember this one take of that when the slow part comes back after the stormy section, and it's all the cello, all the second cello has all those passages, and I got through that section, and just toward the end of it, I was trying so hard that I just I couldn't play anymore. I just stopped. It's like I just like shorted out, and he said, "Why did you stop? That was good. That was good." And I was like, "Really?" I mean, I was trying so hard, I had no idea whether it was good or not. Well, anyway, that's what's on that take is what's on that recording.
Oh,
but he knew, he knew that it was good, and he wasn't just talking about his own playing. So there is something that comes from experience, and I think, going back to your original question about this, I know I went off on a tangent.
Oh no, you're great.
But I think that a lot of our rehearsals, we do play through, especially if it's a piece we haven't played recently. I mean, now when we get together, we're just going to be like, I don't even recognize who you are anymore, So we're going to have to play through things just to sort of get that feeling back again. I'm sure it'll come back.
I think we all feel that way a bit right now.
About everything, about everything. So I think that when we are rehearsing, especially on the day of a concert or close to a concert, we're not so much playing through movements at that point. If we're playing through movements to get the feeling for it, like the day before or an hour before the concert, then we're not really prepared for the concert. We've got to do that a little more ahead of time, so that we're really working on details, and not tiring ourselves out too much. You don't want to give your all at a dress rehearsal and then you're tired by the end of the concert. So that's always a question of pacing as well. Well, as a performer, that.
Well, I think about in terms of like just endurance and pacing. I think Yo-Yo Ma had said he only will give up to 90% of his energy.
Yeah.
Like as long as he doesn't go past that, then it's a way to just keep yourself in check.
Yeah. He has a little bit left in reserve. Yeah. Yeah. You have to check the gas tank every once in a while. Make sure you're not getting where the next gas station is and whether you can get where you want to go. But it depends too. It depends if we've played the piece. We could have played the piece the night before, and sometimes people have ideas about what worked and didn't work. Usually, what didn't work, or that they felt from that last performance. So we're always changing things. We're not a group that fixes things in a recording period in September, and then we just go and do it exactly the same way every night. For us, it depends a lot on the acoustics. It depends on how recently we've played the piece, and a lot of times we'll change things in terms of acoustics, which I know some groups just don't do that. I think Guarneri Quartet, they didn't drive themselves crazy with that, but we do, because you go out and listen, and every hall sounds different, and it's going to sound different when people come into the hall, but you get some idea, at least if it's a dead space or a very live acoustic, and what you have to do to work. And sometimes we'll come off stage after the first piece and say, it didn't dry up as much as I thought it would. Let's take it easy with the tempos or something like that, or we just do it ourselves, just a sense of what's working. Yeah, well, the Cleveland Quartet, that was a great quartet, and they have a gorgeous recording of the Cavatina as well, and beautiful, all four of them on that. It's gorgeous. Yeah.
You bring up Guarneri Quartet quite a bit. Great.
Okay, well, I think that the two biggest influences in the early years, and we're going back to mid 1970s, late 70s, we studied with Robert Mann at Juilliard, and Gene and I met 50 years ago now, and started playing in a quartet. That was before the Emerson, but it was the beginning of the Emerson, the budding Emerson. So I mean, we're very much influenced by Robert Mann as our mentor, and also hearing the Juilliard Quartet play a lot, especially their Bartók quartets. For us, that was something we tried to achieve or come close to, and I think also we got to hear the Guarneri Quartet play a lot in those days, and I was particularly taken. I had heard Arnold Steinhardt play when I was a kid in Cleveland because he was assistant concertmaster there, and so I always loved his playing even before the Guarneri Quartet was formed, and so I remember I felt in many ways I patterned my playing after him and after Bobby Mann. I think those were my two biggest influences in terms of quartets. And then also my violin teacher, Oskar Shumsky, played in a great quartet with Primrose and Joseph Gingold and Harvey Shapiro called the Primrose Quartet. And so I remember we played Opus 132 for Mr. Shumsky, and that was amazing and he still knew that piece. I mean, he was playing the really hard passages like from memory, and then because he had played it probably 30 years before or something, but he remembered them. So yeah, but the Guarneri definitely was one of the groups, and Cleveland too. I mean, we listened. Cleveland, Tokyo was just a little bit older than we were. Cleveland's a little older, but Guarneri and Juilliard were more like the generation. Cleveland and Tokyo were kind of in between them and us. So, but we listened as much as we could to live concerts and recordings, and then later we were very much influenced by the Borodin Quartet. That's what brought us to Shostakovich. So yeah, you people tell me that they tell their students not to listen to recordings, but I really don't agree with that. I think you should learn it from the score and do it your way, but I think for me I've learned more, I think, from listening to recordings and looking at the score.
Oh, absolutely.
Even about what I don't want to do, It's not
exactly.
It's not always I'm copying Arnold Steinhardt. It's or Bobby Mann. It's sometimes it's well, that's beautiful, but I wouldn't do it that way. You learn from that, and so I'll try to do it my way, and it probably doesn't work. But anyway, it's part of the process. But I'll tell you a funny story though. I got a call. This is a long time ago when the quartet was just sort of starting out. I got a call out of the blue. I'm driving in my car, and my cell phone rings, and it's Arnold Steinhardt, and he says, "Phil?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "I hope you don't mind my calling you." I said, "No. Who is this?" He says, because I couldn't really hear him. He said, "Arnold Steinhardt." Arnold Steinhardt, what do you call? Are you okay? What's so? It's like because he said it kind of quickly, and I didn't really catch it the first time. And then he says, "Yeah." I said, "Something really funny just happened. I just had to call you, so I got your number from so and so." I don't know. But anyway, he said, I was driving in my car. I said, "That's funny. I'm driving in my car." He said, and I was listening to the radio, and it was in the middle of a performance of Beethoven Opus 18, number 6. And it was obviously a live concert. I could hear there was some sound, some coughing. And he said, and I was trying to think, who is this? He said, it's really good playing, but the group is not quite settled yet. It's obviously a young group, but it's really good playing. They're really together. It's in tune. It's musical, good sound. He said, I'll bet it's the Emerson Quartet. So he said, and I had an appointment, a doctor's appointment, and I sat in the car and waited till the end of the piece because I was so curious. I was late for my doctor's appointment. But he said, "I'm calling you just after the appointment now." And he said, so I waited till the end and really curious if it was the Emerson Quartet. And then the announcer came on and said, that was Beethoven's Opus 18, number 6 in B flat, played by the Guarneri Quartet. And he said, it was so nice. He called me, to tell me this story. But yeah, that's what it's like. I mean,
what a compliment, though.
Well, of course, but it was just funny because it was obviously a quartet that wasn't settled yet, and it's his own quartet. But that's the way it is. It's just you never can be completely objective about what you're doing, even listening to recordings. And then there are concerts that you feel don't go well or as well, and then you listen to a recording of that concert, and it almost always is surprisingly better than you thought. And unfortunately, the reverse is true too, where you think, "Oh man, that was like riding the wave. That was just felt so good." And then you listen to it, and invariably it's not as good as you thought. So at a certain point, you just can't keep beating yourself up about this, and just go out there and play. And especially now, like having not played with my quartet for so many months, I just want to get out there, and I'd give anything just to go out there and play a really bad concert with them right now.
Well, I think people would still want to come, just no matter what, like just we're all definitely hungry to go out and play and hear. When is your next tentative performance?
Well, beginning of January. I mean, in terms of for an audience, but I don't know whether that's going to happen. Yeah, we'll see.
Mm-hmm. Have you considered possibly doing a very small, socially distant audience?
Well, that was what was supposed to happen originally at the 92nd Street Y, but I think they just decided it's just too dangerous, and even New York is relatively
right
doing well, but I think it's just safer to do it this way, and then we'll see. Yeah, sure. I mean, well, what we're doing is doing some performances that will be streamed with no audience, and it's not the same thing exactly, but at least we'll be together. And we had to wait till we felt that it was safe to be together.
Of course. No, I know that I can speak for all of us. We were very worried about you all going back, since you're primarily New York. So
right.
I'm very glad that you asked Adrian about those masks, and we were really happy to send it to you.
Yeah, no, that was helpful. It was at a time when it was very hard to get masks, and so I definitely used them in the beginning, and now it's a little easier to get masks. I just partly because there's so many people who aren't using them, which is the wrong reason. I'd rather that they weren't available and people were using them, but hopefully things will get better and we'll be able to be there. We're looking forward to it. And I was joking about playing a bad concert. I promise you we won't play a bad concert for you.
No, of course. Of course.